Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Warming the Bench. This is episode 5 coming to you this week. Bev, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. Very much looking forward to recording session 5. I cannot believe it. It's just amazing.
I
They're
know.
mounting up, aren't they?
They really are. It's kind of crazy, actually. 5 episodes have gone, or not yet 5 episodes, but the 4 have gone by pretty quickly. I'm really surprised at how fast it's seeming to flow, but that's good because time does fly when you're having fun, right?
Absolutely. And we've got something to celebrate. It's live on YouTube. Whee! Yippee, yippee, yippee.
Yee.
After lots
Ah,
of
guys, the
challenges.
enemy has Yeah, the enemy has been conquered. The enemy was YouTube, and we have conquered it, thankfully.
Your
We have
nemesis.
conquered it.
You mentioned
Yeah.
nemesis in your message to me, and I immediately thought of Star Trek for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah, sounds right. Honestly, that does sound right. Our YouTube links are available on Instagram, so please make sure you're following us on Instagram. I've also posted on our stories, and I will post and spam everybody with the YouTube link because we have finally made it happen. Yay!
Whee!
Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to wrap up the WSL because it did wrap up today, actually. Today is Saturday. We're recording. You will probably hear this episode on Monday, but we want to just speak at how the WSL wrapped up. Manchester City were crowned champions about a week and a half ago, so that's not really surprising. They finished in first, obviously, as we know. Arsenal secured second spot, which means they have automatic qualification into the Champions League. Chelsea come in third, which means they will go through the qualifying rounds for the Champions League. And Leicester City, as we've mentioned a few times now, at the bottom for that playoff spot. Bev, any
Mm.
surprises with the top 3 or top 4? Again, the number 4 spot was actually Manchester United, so unfortunately they do miss out on Champions League for next season. Any surprises on your end?
Yes, I would have to say that Chelsea come in third. I mean, they just scraped through, didn't
Mhm.
they? Quite a surprise to me. However, I don't think it's a negative thing. I know the fans in Bonpaster and the players will feel very
Mhm.
differently, but I feel it's a kick up the backside. I feel it's going to be a motivating factor for to prepare them for the next season.
I agree, actually. It's not a bad thing. I think they've had automatic qualification or top spot qualification for several years now, and it's just going to be a couple of extra fixtures. I mean, when they go deep into competitions, they're used to playing a lot of fixtures anyway, so that's not going to be super surprising.
Yeah.
Just going to have to get in gear a little earlier this year coming up. That's pretty much it. One thing Bev and I did want to speak about because we were chatting about it just before we got on to record is there's a lot of changes happening to clubs with a
Mm.
lot of players, some retirements, some moving around. Let me just go through who is kind of out of sight right now. So Millie Bright has retired. Lucy
Mhm.
Staniforth and Laura Coombs all announced retirements over the last couple of weeks.
Mm.
Katie McCabe announced that she will be departing Arsenal after I think it was 11 years or close to 11 years.
Mm.
That's a huge
Yep.
one. Beth Beth Mead as well, nearly 10 years with the club. Sam Kerr, 6.5 years. It seems a little nostalgic because those are all massive names that we've been hearing for so long,
Mm.
did so much for their clubs. How are you feeling about it, Bev? Do you feel like a new kind of dawn is on the horizon for the WSL? What does it mean for everything?
Mm.
I think there's a lot of unanswered questions for a few of these players for sure.
Well, this year in particular, I get the impression that there's a real churn, that things are
Mhm,
changing. We've seen beginning to see commitments from major clubs, big commitments in terms of
mhm.
finances and strategic and vision plans for the future. Brighton and Hove Albanian for a purpose-built stadium is one. I think Man City have just announced a £10 million purpose-built training facility, which looks absolutely
Yeah,
amazing. So you can see that,
beautiful.
yeah, the tide is changing. And it's not
Mhm,
surprising that there's a bit of a shake-up this year you know?
mm,
London City Lioness is
yeah,
another one with Michelle Kang and the investment that she's made and making, and that she's got that vision to produce an excellent product that she wants fans to come in,
Absolutely.
watch, and enjoy the game.
Mhm.
Um, I it's all these it's they're leaving. I mean, Sam Kerr, I think we knew that one was on the horizon, so I'm not surprised by that one. Man
Mhm.
City faffing about with Bunny Shaw. I'm not
Mhm.
sure whether she's going now. From my understanding, she's still in talks with Charlotte O'Neill. So
Mhm.
that's and I would have thought we would have heard some kind of announcement by now that Bunny Shaw is now going to Chelsea because they were the major front runners, weren't they? Or it's been reported that they have been the major front runners, but there's still nothing. And
Mhm.
I'm wondering if there's some kind of stalling going on. There's still talks going on, or is it just wishful thinking? I'm not quite sure. But we don't
Mhm.
know where she's going. And
Yeah.
then there's, Katie McCabe, very, very surprised because Wednesday,
Mhm.
all the players that were leaving Arsenal had, a presentation and they were applauded by the fans, but not Katie McCabe. It wasn't announced until the day after. I was very, very surprised by that because I thought up until
I
recently she was
noticed.
going to be offered a new
Yeah.
contract. And that seems to be quite
Mhm.
strange there. We don't know where Sam Kerr everything seems to be up in the air there. What are your thoughts, Dan?
Yeah, it really does. I think a couple things to keep in mind is most contracts do not expire until May 31st. So there could be a reason why we haven't heard announcements on specific things, because you can't
Okay.
technically sign a new contract until June 1st. So that could be part of the reason why. I did hear about Bunny, so that's one to keep an eye on for sure. Sam, hotly rumored to be going to the NWSL. I would be very
Ah,
surprised if she doesn't.
yeah.
It was kind of leaked by Australian press about a month and a half ago that she was going to the Denver Summit, which is the
Yes.
team that Nick Cushing, is currently the coach of. So
Yeah.
I would think unless there's something that has radically changed, she's probably going there. The other one would have potentially been Boston Legacy. Her wife is from the state of Massachusetts, so that wouldn't be surprising as well. Um,
Mm.
to go back to the United States and be close to family, especially now with their own family. McCabe, hotly linked with Manchester City, so we'll see if that pans out.
Ah.
But definitely a little bit surprising. And just a little note on a couple of these. Katie McCabe has won everything with Arsenal.
Ah.
So absolutely has given her everything to that club and then some. She was a teenager when she was recruited by the club to come over, and really given a chance to be a huge legend for them under Joe Montemuro. So he definitely saw what I think so many of us see when she plays. Laura Coombs, a great, person in the WSL, has given so much to the game as well. Millie Bright, retiring with 20 trophies at Chelsea, no small feature, absolutely club legend for sure.
Ah.
Sam, same thing. Beth Mead as well for what she's given to Arsenal and what she's done to the WSL. And I actually I saw something this week. A former player was talking about first time ever coming up against, Beth Mead when she was still playing for Sunderland, and
Ah.
she still has nightmares about Beth, what she did
Yes.
to Chelsea, because there was a game against Chelsea, Sunderland and Chelsea, and she absolutely just murdered them. So that's a
Ah.
fun little memory of Beth, and I think wherever she goes, she's going to be very valuable. I think she still has a lot to give. Sam still has a lot to give. Katie still has a lot to give. So wherever they end up, we wish them well. It's definitely gonna be weird seeing some of these people not in their normal shirts anymore, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's another strange one is Bethany England because not only is
Oh,
she
Beth England, yes.
still a great player,
Mhm,
but she is also a great leader and a great
mhm,
role model and ambassador for the game, isn't she? She really is. And I'm
mhm,
very surprised by that
mhm.
one. But in another
Yeah,
sense,
definitely.
it is all
Mhm,
about the club's commitment that they are giving power and decisions to the managers and coaches to say, right, okay, what is your
mhm.
vision? Right, okay, we're gonna buy
Yeah,
into that, and they're putting the money where their mouth is, and that's a great thing, and
mhm,
obviously because of, progress and momentum moving forward, there will always be casualties,
Mhm.
especially of football.
Of course. And the thing is also, a lot of these players, like I mentioned, the ones who are not retiring, obviously, they still have so much to give, and it's pretty clear that they do. It's not an indication necessarily of their performances or how they're playing. It's just like you said, it might just be a changing of different
Yes.
commitments, a
Yeah.
changing of management, of viewers, of views on how things should be shaped, and that's all right.
Mm,
People are entitled to make decisions, business decisions, whatever it
mm,
might be. Sometimes we don't have to like those choices, but unfortunately, it does happen. It is a business at the end of the day, as much as people
mm,
don't like to hear that sometimes. But,
mm.
decisions have to be made. And sometimes you have to make hard decisions and you might not be liked for it, but, they might work out really well in the end. Hopefully. That's the hope, right?
Well, I mean, we're here to promote the women's
Hmm.
game and to build community
Hmm.
and support of the women's game. And, that's
Exactly.
that's that for us, that's quite a big vision, isn't it? And the game, it's
Hmm.
still in its infancy, isn't it? Let's face it, it's still in its infancy. We've often talked about how
Hmm.
subpar the foundations of the women's game is. So if you look at
Hmm.
the bigger picture, losing Sam Kerr, Bethany England moving on, and Bernice Shaw, where she's going. These actually they're very small players in a very big vision, aren't they?
Definitely, and they've meant so much to their clubs, but they can go on and mean something to another club as well, and
Yeah,
they can help grow the game in different ways at different places. That's the beauty of it for sure.
yeah.
Um, Bev, one thing I did want to touch on is we just mentioned that Manchester United finished fourth, which means they will miss out on Champions League. A lot of ups and downs for them this season. They only have
Mm,
one win in the last 10 games in all
yeah.
competitions. Definitely a little bit troubling, especially for a club as big as Manchester United. And granted,
Mm,
there are some issues there with how the club is run, the lack of investment, the lack of kind of commitment
mm.
to it. But what do you think in terms of where they go from here? Is it a management problem? Is it an overall resource problem? What do you think is kind of the kicker?
All of the above, to be honest with you, Dan. I mean, if you've got
Yeah.
the owner of the club that really doesn't know
Mhm,
very little about the women's game, not particularly interested really, unless it comes to money.
mhm,
Um, I wonder about them, to be honest with you, because I wonder where they're gonna finish in terms of the league next year. Will they make Champions League in next year? There are lots of questions. Will Mark Skinner be there? What players will be there? There's lots of coming and going over
mhm.
in Manchester United. And as you say,
Yeah.
Dan, it's a long established historic club, isn't it? Big club.
Yes. Yep.
And
Mhm.
yet,
Yeah.
the women's game can't seem to, cash in on that, because we were talking about, the structure last week. We were talking about branding and that markets are open to the women's game, like piggybacking the men's game.
Mhm,
It's just I'm just
mhm.
concerned, to be honest with you, all things considered.
Yeah, me too. I think, like you said, Manchester United's such a recognizable brand all over the world.
Mm,
You would think that they would probably be one of the leaders in the women's game because they certainly have the platform and the fan base and the global recognition to be able to do it. And so
yeah.
my thing is, while I'm very concerned just, for the club as a whole, it's a little disappointing as well because there's such an opportunity there to be a leader in this. I mean, you would think that they would be, right? And to not see them capitalize on their fan base and on their, kind of like I said, global brand and recognition, it is very disappointing on top of all of the other things. And I you would hope that rectifies itself at some point, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's very, very disappointing. That's all I kind of, keep coming back to.
Mhm. Well, I'm looking forward to the 26-27 season. I think there's going to be lots of interesting things going on. I'd like just to add one more thing. In terms of
Sure.
positions 5 to 10 in the league, I think, yeah, 5 to
Mhm.
10. I'm just very interested in this time next year, what clubs are going to be in those positions? So
Mhm.
there could be lots of clubs jostling for positions 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. For instance, London City Lionesses, Tottenham
Mhm.
Hotspur,
Mhm.
maybe Liverpool, um,
Yeah.
um, Aston Villa, possibly.
Possibly, yep.
Yeah, who
Brighton.
else? Brighton, that's it. Yeah, Brighton, that's 5. Anyone else?
Yep.
Oh, maybe Birmingham, the newbies? Maybe Crystal Palace,
Yeah,
the
Birmingham,
newbies?
definitely.
Yeah, Birmingham, yeah,
Yep,
they've got a lot of investment going into them, haven't they? They're being taken very seriously. I just wonder how
mhm.
those 5 positions are gonna land next year.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting, I think. I think we might have a couple of surprises, which I'm all for it. As we've kinda mentioned in the
Mm,
past, it's really cool to see, the order being disrupted a little bit,
yeah.
and we're all for it. Let's shake it up a little bit and see kinda what transpires, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it can only
Um,
be good for the women's game, I would say.
100%, 100%. Speaking of what is good for the women's game, that takes us into our topic for today, which is on injuries and women's health overall, mental, physical, all the above. Now, before we start this conversation, just want to preface this by saying Bev and I are not experts. We're not doctors. We're not
Mm.
physios. We don't really have any sort of expertise or any sort of experience at all in terms of health and wellness, and especially in women's sports. We just want to have a broader conversation on injuries and the overall kind of health because it does seem to be a large talking point these days in the game specifically. And I think it's interesting to get into it because what you'll see from our conversation is there is a lot of nuance on this topic, and we're learning as we go. That's kind of what I took from what I was researching this week. But I'm going to pass it over to Bev, our starter of all conversations, because I know she's got some stats lined up for us. Bev.
Right, okay. Oh, in at the end of the conversation, Dan, I've already got these
Mhm,
noted down, but can you
mhm.
note the negatives and the positives in terms of patterns and correlations?
Sure.
Yeah. So, as a result of our
Yep.
conversation, what are the patterns and correlations in terms of the negatives and positives? It's just interesting when you have
Mhm.
these types of conversations, isn't it? Now,
Absolutely.
I'm gonna start with the ACL.
Mhm,
So, for those that don't know, I didn't really know what ACL stood for. I've always understood it as ACL. So, the anterior cruciate ligament, which is a strong
mhm,
band of tissue that connects the thigh bone to the shin bone. That's my understanding. I think there's a bit more information than that, but
mhm,
that's in its simplest form. Now,
mhm,
going back to the Women's World Cup, around that time, there were 30 prominent players for their countries that were not available to play
mhm.
for their countries. That is huge, isn't it? Um, now,
Absolutely.
I have to say, this is very nuanced. There is no, yes, it's this. Yes, it's that.
Mhm,
It's very, very nuanced. And I'm coming across lots of reasons being put forward. It may be all of them, or it may be one in
mhm,
particular, but I'm not clear because lots of information and research. In terms of the research, actually, there is research going on in the background, but it's very slow
mhm,
because,
mhm,
this is tied up with funding and sponsorship. And, there has been a suggestion around the type and design of football boots that the women wear. And, obviously the sponsorship around Nike and Adidas and various other um, designers
mhm,
of the football boots. I have to say, I'm gonna start I don't want sympathy here, but I'm gonna throw this out. It's my lead into this. When my mother, was ill, first off with, cancer, her first, bout of
Mhm.
cancer, it was really quite a challenge getting the doctors on board that there was ever anything wrong with her in the first place. I went away to some training, I
Yep.
came back, and my mum said to me, she said, "Bev, I just want you to have a look in the toilet. I've been to the toilet. Can you have a look?" So I had a look and I
Mhm.
came out of the toilet and I was sick and I'm going to be very honest about that. I think I'm going to be honest about that given the nature of the conversation we're having today, Dan. And I'm sure that mental health is going to come into this topic. And it was almost
Mhm.
like a pig had been slaughtered and thrown down the toilet. It was
Yep.
horrific. And I said, I marched
Mhm.
her off to the doctors. We went to the doctors. Mum was in a bit of a daze. I explained to the doctor what had happened, and the doctor got quite aggravated and defensive. He pulled her eyelids down and said, "She's not, oh, what's that? She's not anemic. She's all right. She's not anemic." And within an hour,
Mhm.
came knocking on our door, having done lots of tests and could see that there was something going on. And within very
Mhm.
quickly, she was taken to hospital and she had kidney cancer. Her kidney had been
Mhm.
completely consumed by a tumour and the urethra as well.
Mhm.
Now, what I'm trying to get across is this. I think we know our bodies as women. I think anybody would
Mhm.
know their bodies, and you would know when there's something wrong or what there's something not quite right within you. And is as much as these, medical people, doctors, surgeons, professors are very well trained, um, I don't think they always know. I don't think they always know best. I don't think that they always
Mhm.
have an understanding, a complete understanding of someone's body. So I might have cancer, touch wood I won't, but my cancer may be forming differently in my body as opposed to somebody else. And I also get
Mhm.
there is this like a godlike syndrome with some people. It depends on the type of personality that you might have. And that everybody is always praising them in and if we add to what we've already discussed in some of our other podcasts, the paternalistic infrastructures,
Mhm.
structures in societies, I can see a massive overlap, sociological, cultural, historical, economical, political overlap with what we're going to talk about today. Um,
Mhm.
there has been, here are some of the reasons behind why there are so many ACLs. The head of female performance at Arsenal has said he thinks there's a tacit link with ACLs and a player being in their cycle or, actually on their menstrual cycle. He said you can actually
Mhm.
break it down into stages in that, pre-menstrual, um, there's changes in hormones, there's levels of tiredness.
Mhm.
It can impact upon your fitness. It can make you fatigued.
Mhm.
You can lose impact upon your hormones, your responses and flex. So all these things collectively, there could be some kind of impact upon the ACL. I also remember watching a documentary with both Beth Mead, and Viv, and they both said that it happened during their menstrual cycle, and they wondered if there was a
Mhm.
correlation between that and being more prone and vulnerable at that time. So that's one
Mhm.
suggestion. Another one by Andy Williams, which is a surgeon, a specialist surgeon in the Premier League. He's convinced that it is structures in society, political, economical, cultural, that is against the women's game. against it in terms of it what
Mhm.
we've already said. The structure, the infrastructure is just not there, Dan. There's not enough research
Yeah.
going on. We don't have purpose-built stadiums, that kind of thing. And he really believes it's down to lack of conditioning or poorer conditioning in comparison to the men. He said because, you would have got the young girls playing on the street corners, lucky enough if they've gone into an academy for a major club, but a lot of them playing in the wrong boots, ill-sitting boots. Maybe they borrow their sister's boots or their brother's boots. And that conditioning,
Mhm.
that lack of conditioning and professional support has contributed to the ACL as well. There's a couple of reasons. What are your
Mhm.
thoughts, Dan?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to go on there, and just to kinda add my own to your personal story, I do believe a lot of research especially is not done on women's health in general,
Yeah.
and there is a sexist, misogynistic, patriarchal kind of
Mm,
cloud that looms over medicine. For people
mm,
who listen in who know me personally, I have Crohn's disease. I was diagnosed in my early 20s with Crohn's disease, and that's a bowel disorder for anyone who's unfamiliar. But I was sick for a long time, losing weight, not really kind of sure what was going on. But obviously, like you said, we know our bodies. I knew something
mm,
wasn't right.
mm,
And one experience I had with a doctor essentially said, "Are you sure you don't just need to speak to somebody?" Essentially trying to tell me that it was in
mm.
my head, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And we hear this a lot. We hear this a lot with women, especially, for years and years, women have suffered with endometriosis, for example, and it's just been told a bad period, whatever, that's normal. It's actually not normal,
Mm,
and there should be some emphasis on figuring out what is going on there because we do not need to be in pain every month with a menstrual cycle. That's not what the
mm,
intention is, right?
mm,
Obviously, there's factors that contribute to that. So I think women's health is understudied to begin with. And the studies that are there, sometimes they're poor focus groups, they're not properly executed. So there's a lot that clouds what we understand about women's health, about the female body, about diseases that maybe disproportionately affect women, things like Alzheimer's, dementia. There's so much,
mm,
unfortunately, that are more dominant in women, and we don't really understand why because of this. And when
mm,
you look at the increase in injuries, and so forth. And there's so much, as you mentioned, there's so much nuance to this conversation because we just don't know. As you said,
mm,
we do
mm,
not know. There can be multiple factors, and I think that's potentially what the consensus is currently on the topic. But there's the biology argument, and some will argue that that's an overused argument. And more are aligned with what you were speaking about the surgeon who says that it's actually more about training. It's not so much about your biological gender, it's more um, your training history. So what did that history look like for you from a child up until professional athleticism
mm,
days, right?
mm,
Did you have that appropriate training? Do you have specific understanding of how to train, maybe if the period is a factor in how you perform. Do you know how to nourish yourself? Do you know how to, learn how to say no when you're not feeling like training or not going as hard? There's so many different factors. And I think
mm,
this is what's frustrating is we're trying to look for, well, what causes this or what causes all of these different things? And there's just so many conflicting pieces of information. It made it actually really difficult to land on a few things because even those few things have so many nuanced branches to it. So I just want to go through a couple of things because what I thought to know, or what I thought I knew, excuse me, about injuries, some of them are very conflicting. So the main school of thought is this is what I kind of gathered. There's a biology, as I said, an anatomy explanation. So researchers kind of are arguing that women have a wider pelvis. There's
yeah,
greater ligament laxicity because of our hormones, excuse me. So our hormones affect us a little bit differently, obviously. We have apparently a smaller ACL size as a woman. And then
mm,
also the different landing mechanics. So how we land might be different to how men land when they're doing certain movements and so forth. And there's also lower hamstring to quadriceps ratio. So ours are a little bit smaller and a little bit lower. And then again, the estrogen level, so hormones, how they affect our bodies from the entire cycle. So it's not just when you're on your period. It's what's before and what's after, right? That's the entire cycle of that 28
Mm,
days or 30 days, depending on your cycle, or less or more, depending on yourself, right?
mm.
So people who support this is just a kind of an insight into how nuanced this conversation is. People who support this say that the injury gap between men and women is too large to ignore the biological aspect because there's so many different patterns across many sports, not just football. And that prevention training for ACLs or for this sort of, especially knee and ligament issues, need to be sex specific. So you need to do different preventative things for males versus females. Critics of this topic, for example, argue that biology is a little bit of an overemphasized topic, and that many studies on this topic are small or poorly controlled, as I mentioned. So that research element comes back into it. Smaller sample size, not as controlled. Perhaps there are other factors that might contribute to why someone's body is a certain way, or someone's kind of genetic makeup is a certain way. So you need to be able to understand what those factors are that could potentially contribute to this. And it also, and this is kind of potentially a theme that we can talk about, it does lead to a little greater conversation on almost showing or kind of showcasing that the female body is somewhat more defective. And that's a very
Yes.
patriarchal concept in and of
Ah,
itself, right? Like, oh, your biology is just different, so you're more prone to injury.
yeah.
And I think that has potentially been used as an excuse. And so a growing number of researchers do say biology does matter, but it's only a part of the whole kind of um, issue board, essentially. It's not the sole factor. It does matter, but it's potentially not as big as we initially thought.
Mm,
What are your
yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, as you were talking, I thought, "Well, this sounds sexist in and of itself." Well,
Yeah.
your body is this, this, and this, therefore, you are to blame.
Mhm.
And that tends to be
Yep.
the narrative, doesn't it, in terms of women? But it's
Yeah.
ubiquitous. My group of friends
Mhm.
over the years, we've talked about our healths, friends that have children, where they
Mm.
talk about, "I know my body, something's wrong," and they have been dismissed. I mean, I know that
Yep.
that's anecdotal, but it is ubiquitous. It really is, and
Mhm.
I'm sure that
It's very
you could.
common.
Yes, you could point to
Yeah.
friends that you've had conversations with yourself. Um, there's also
Yeah.
been talk about
Definitely.
there's also again, we've done a lot of talking before we actually started the podcast, and we've often come
Mhm.
back to the foundations, the structure, the infrastructure of the game, and now we've got a position
Mhm.
where it's the fixtures. There's congestions in the fixtures. They're being overplayed. I
Mm.
wonder, we spoke about Man United before we started this topic.
Mhm.
Is there something along those lines where they just don't have the depth and breadth within in the squad, but also don't have the funding? So are those different interconnecting aspects as well? It is highly nuanced, but what I do know is that the research isn't coming to conclusions quickly enough for me.
Mhm. Mhm. I agree. And I think on that point, Bev, there's a couple of different things that I was researching, and two things that kind of jumped out from what you said was the system neglect, right? So,
Mm,
how that for example, youth academies, initial trainings, do our clubs, and when they're coming up, whether they're semi-pro or professional, but certain leagues might not have the proper medical staff, the proper recovery staff,
mm,
physiotherapists, all these sorts of things and so forth. And then also the game has changed a lot. So as we know this, right, it's a lot faster.
yeah,
It's a lot more physically taxing because of the schedule, and
yeah,
tactically more intense. So you know that you're expected to understand and perform these skills on every time. You're always switched on. Your body has to go through all of these different things. And when you look at players at the highest level who are playing for club and country, they're somewhat in the 40 to 60 games a year kind of calendar, and that was never a thing 10 or 15 years ago, right?
yeah.
with the
Yeah.
increase of competitions and all of these sort of things. And so a big part of this, and it connects to that overall training, is the load. We talk about load management a lot in the women's game, obviously in men's game as well, but they speak a lot about load because that training history, how you were trained in order to build up to the elite or professional level is kind of connects itself to what your load is now. So some players can keep a higher load and can have, back-to-back 90s, and it does not affect them as much as others. And I think it's
Mm,
really interesting when you look at all these different factors, how they all kind of connect, because we just spoke about
mm.
biology, and it says biology is a factor, but it's not the only
Yeah.
factor.
Yeah.
And it does make sense when you look at, oh, biology was, or the overall kind of male versus female, you're trained differently. So now,
Mm,
or if you're training differently, is your load bearing ability going to be different? And all these things kind of filter into each other. And I also
mm,
believe that, um, we talk about the higher level players, or the elite level players who have injuries at a high level. But there's also the ones who don't play enough, and that's a load
mm,
problem too. So they're not
mm,
playing sometimes for 3 or 4 weeks, 5 weeks. If they don't play for their country, they're only at that maybe 20, 25 games a year, and that's an injury risk as well because they're not maintaining a load that is enough for their body to kind of balance itself as well, which I thought was
mm.
really interesting. So there's calendar congestion, and then there's calendar sparsity as well for other players, which both of them contribute, a little bit to injury problems as well.
But we've spoken in the past about there's a difference between your doctor or physiotherapist saying, "Yep, yep, they'll pass you
Mhm.
fit," and match fitness.
Mhm.
They are very different things.
Yes.
I mean, I've looked at Leah
Mhm.
Williamson over time, and, she seems quite injury prone, but when she's come back, she looks as though she's really struggled at times.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
Lauren James is
Yeah, and
another.
I
Yeah, they seem
yeah,
to be struggling,
yeah.
and they are very important players, Leah Williamson is a
Mhm.
captain of England. Lauren James is an absolute
Mhm.
game changer, but they are first and
Mhm.
foremost human beings. They're not machines.
Of course. Exactly. And I think, and that's a good point. We speak a lot about match fitness versus just overall fitness. So usually when players are coming back from injury, they're named on the bench first,
Mm,
in a
mm,
game because they haven't played, and they can maybe their load for coming back from injury is only 18 minutes or whatever it is, and it's very specific. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is there's a whole science behind that, right? Like, they have a calculator, they know all of these different things, they have all this data, all this analysis that says, "Nope, Leah is only fit to play 18 minutes today, ergo she cannot be subbed in before the 74th or 75th minute of a game." That's
mm,
it. And
mm.
all of these things, and there is arguments to be made of when you do come back from an injury, is the return to play, what does that look like? And our clubs, do they really have an understanding of what that model looks like on its basis, but also you have to factor in that's all gonna be individual, right? We see how when people come back from ACLs, everyone's recovery is completely different. Some people are back in 8 or 9 months, some are back in 18 months.
Mm.
And that's just because there's so many different factors. Again, everybody's body is unique and different, and how they're going to react to all these, the rehabilitation process, the return to play process, what that kind of looks like is all gonna be different. And I think that's important to point out because when talking about ACL prevention, for example, or ACL rehab, all of that's gonna be nuanced as well because there's no one size fits all for any of those 2 things, whether it's rehabbing an injury or trying to prevent it. So what prevention methods might work for some players is not gonna work for other players. Rehab, the same thing. It's all very, very fascinating and also very frustrating when you're trying to just find out some pieces of information.
Well, I mean, if you consider the excuse the pun, but the playing field isn't equal. So if you look at
Mhm,
Jamaica or
mhm,
some of the Africa nations, they don't have
mhm,
the kind of investment that some of the Western countries have. So I remember
mhm.
Jamaica had to have a crowdfund to be able to attend tournaments. So what does that say
Yep.
about their physical health? Because it just isn't on the same
Mhm,
playing ground, is it, as the others that can afford
mhm.
to
Yep.
invest in the women's game?
Mhm. Definitely, and that's a major problem. You've seen it as well, players a little bit down in certain leagues sometimes have not had the ability to be managed with an ACL or an Achilles injury or so forth. They've had
Mm.
to fund their own surgeries and so
Yeah,
forth because they just do not
yeah,
have the rehabilitation methods, the physios, maybe their insurance doesn't cover certain, procedures and so forth. And so that's, again, like you said, that unequal playing field. And getting back
yeah,
to what that surgeon that you pointed out was speaking about is the inconsistencies or the inequalities in all of these things, right? A top
yeah,
club like Arsenal or Chelsea are gonna have the best of the best because they have the
absolutely.
money and they have the investment to do so, right?
Um,
But ACLs happen in every league across the world, and so what does that look like? Do you have to rehab by yourself? Do you have the internal supports? Is there access to a surgeon who understands what ACL reconstructions look like if you're choosing a reconstruction or if you're going to do a certain graft? Like, there's so many different things that you need to consider. And
mm,
unfortunately, it's just part of that, all of that inequality does lead to the nuanced conversations too, because that definitely is a factor in what causes them, what prevents them, how you recover from them. Like I said, unfortunately, it's just kind of an all over the place topic. And I feel as though so much more information is going to come out as we continue to learn more. And I think also, Bev, one thing I noticed, and I'm not sure if this came up in your research, is
yes.
there's a lot of critics that say it's not actually an increase. We're just hearing about it more now because
Yeah.
players for years have been doing their ACL and it's just there's increased media coverage now. So it's starting to feel like an epidemic, but it's always kind
Mhm.
of been a problem.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's a bit like, some managers and coaches that have been weeded out over the last 10 years, isn't it? Prior to
Hmm.
10 years ago or a certain, time in on the timeline of the women's game, it would have been acceptable
Hmm.
for managers to bully and cajole, female players, but now it's not, or if they're falling, subpar, they're out. The bar has raised as the timeline has progressed with the game, and so has,
Hmm.
the topic of conversation around women's health, I think, in the game.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, in speaking of women's health, we've been talking a lot about increased of injuries and so forth. And I think so to wrap up the physical side of it, because I know we wanted to speak about overall
Mm.
well-being. Um, what my research and granted, it's not even research, it's more just Googling because I'm not a scientist by any means. But what seems to be the consensus right now, at least, it's a multifactorial model, right? So we spoke about
Mm,
hormones, biology, biomechanics, things like resources, pitch quality, the different types of footwear, training history and training loads, recovery, and then just athlete history overall, right? Because our bodies are completely different. So maybe there's something that happened to someone in childhood that kind of changed their overall body and that has affected how they recover from things or maybe how they
mm,
train or they have an underlying medical condition that is contributing to different factors that would unfortunately disqualify them from a traditional study on ACLs, for example. And that's, I think, when we spoke about, different types of research being inconsistent or being poorly executed, a lot of those factors contributed to that. People that maybe shouldn't have been studied because of different factors that could
mm.
lead to research being all over the place, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, but another topic on top of this is the mental well-being of
Oh, yeah.
athletes,
You
specifically
read
when
my
they are
mind.
injured. Yeah, when they're injured or when they are especially at, like, high top clubs and they are playing consistently day over day, every 3 or 4 days, what that physical load does to the mental side of a
Mm.
player, and if they are injured, it is a very isolating experience, and I think mental wellness is a huge part of the recovery process as well. What were your thoughts on that? Because I know it definitely came up in your research.
Yes, well, you just you're about to beautifully link to what I was going to talk about in terms of eating disorders, actually, within the game.
Mm,
And FIFPro, in 2024, they did a study of 74 players over a 12-month period, which isn't very long, is it, a 12-month period? And they found
no.
that 20%, 1 in 5 of the players had experienced an eating disorder, and
Mhm.
that heightened during an injury. So, you mentioned about
Mm.
how isolating it is to have to come back from an ACL or a knee injury or whatever type of injury it has been. It's very isolating because they are separated from the other players, aren't they? And they have to go through rehab
Mhm.
on their own, or unless another player is also injured and they can join them for
Mhm.
mutual support. But
Mhm.
they were saying it did, the eating disorder, there is a correlation between an injury and them being under stress. So then the eating
Mhm.
disorder can come out is as a way, I suppose, is controlling the situation, dealing with the situation
Right.
as a form of comfort. It's very complex, it's very nuanced. Um, I know that there have been some very high profile players that have experienced eating disorders. One of them is Fran Kirby, Katrina Gorry,
Mhm.
Alex Greenwood. Do you know of
Mm.
any others, Dan?
Yeah, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Molly Bartrip was another one who spoke about she had an issue with eating disorders. And
Mm,
there is some over in the NWSL. I don't wanna say her name specifically because 'cause I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was Sydney Leroux, former US international, and she plays at Angel City. I do believe she did speak about, an eating disorder as well and dealing with that and what the impact that had on her mental health. Obviously, it is it's a physical disorder, but it is a mental disorder as well, because of what contributes to eating disorders. But, she spoke really openly about what that's done to her, and she was actually out of the game for quite a while, just recently came back, but she was on a mental health leave, because she was struggling with a lot of different things, and now, she's into her 30s, she's a mother, and still what that impact has had and how that's affected her life and her ability to play and her ability to show up every day. Um, and it's interesting, Bev, because these spike during injury times, but I also think a lot of the, eating disorder conversation does also filter into education on nutrition and what that means, right? So Fran
mm,
Kirby, I think, spoke pretty openly about, years ago, they were abused and they were called fat and they were called
yep.
all these different things. So they weren't even properly educated on what their bodies need for nourishment, and then on top of it, there is a psychological element as to what they looked like and how they looked on the pitch and all of these things that contributed to these unfortunate conditions for them that allowed these diseases to prosper
Yeah,
in their mind.
absolutely.
So there's a
Yeah.
whole factor. Yeah, there's a whole
Mhm.
factor behind that, unfortunately. It's very, very sad.
Well, going back to Fran, I'm not sure if you remember it. You probably will, knowing your depth and breadth of knowledge. And in Fran was talking about she's been on the receiving end of an awful lot of abuse in relation to body
Mhm.
shaming and what she looks like. And she said, I
Yep.
scored 3 goals. I'm not sure if it was for England or maybe Chelsea. And she said it wasn't that she was congratulated on scoring a hat trick, it was about the fact that somebody said that she looked fat. And
Mm.
there was a short clip of her wearing a jacket during training. It was quite a hot day, and one of her teammates said to her, "Fran, why are you wearing a jacket?" And she said, "Well, I've been told I'm too fat, so I'm covering up." And it went viral, and she had a huge amount of support, um, inundated with
Mhm.
support, for her on the basis that somebody had said to her that she was fat. And yet she had,
Yeah.
she's it's
That's
an credible player, and she still is. Alex Greenwood was talking about it,
Mhm.
and she's around about 15, 16 years of age, and she was playing football, I think, near in her home, and she would use like the alleyway, the
Mhm.
archway, as a goal. And she said, her
Mhm.
dad was watching and she almost fainted because she was restricting her food intake. And her dad absolutely
Right.
wiped the floor with her and said, if you don't buck up your ideas, I'm not going to take you to training anymore, and you're going to have to think about what you're going to do with your life because I won't take you. So you really need to think about what you're
Yeah.
doing. She said, even today, she struggles with her weight, her perception of herself. She does at times limit what she eats. She looks at what she eats. Shall I eat that, or do I want to go to a party, in a couple of weeks' time and look good in a dress that I've picked out? She said it all goes through her mind,
Mm.
and she still has to, work hard to manage it.
Yeah, and I think that's when we talk about injuries and, what kinda contributes to injuries, nutrition and the
Mm,
body being properly nourished is a part of it, right? Because,
yeah.
if you're not eating well, if you're not sleeping well, all of these different things and, people with eating disorders, they do have insomnia and unfortunately these things that happen, that contributes to your body not being able to, um, kind of bear the brunt of training, for example, or the brunt of the load that you need to be able to take in because, improper nutrition or restrictive eating impacts your muscles, it impacts your joints, all of those things that do not have that nourishment anymore. So unfortunately, it's another contributing factor. It's a mental issue, but it also can result in a massive physical issue. Not to mention just the overall impact on your health. There's a lot of cardiac issues with eating disorders,
Mm,
blood issues.
mm,
It restricts you from getting a period a lot of the time, which you need to have a period. I think years ago we were conditioned to believe if you're really high performing and athletic, not getting your period is, oh, that's
you did.
fine, it's normal. It's absolutely not normal. You need to get a regular period. Um, if you're obviously of age to be having it, of course, which most athletes are. Yeah, it affects your bones if you're not eating correctly.
Mm,
There's just so much, unfortunately, that goes into it. And that mental side is such a huge thing of it. And I think that's probably why a lot of clubs have those sports psychologists or therapists available now when it comes to specifically injured players, because to be able to manage what they're going through in an injury time, they can't manage it on their own, a lot of them, and it's important to have these resources. And again, as we said, so many clubs do not have those supports in place, and you only can imagine what certain players that do not have these resources, what they're struggling with on top of that physical limitation that their injury has now given them, right?
mm. I mean, I was listening to Millie Bright. I'm not surprised that she's
Mhm,
retired. I think in the last couple of
mhm.
years, it's been really tough for Millie. Because she's
Yes.
get over injuries, and obviously everything that we're talking about probably has applied to her situation, and also that she, is a
Mhm.
fact that she is getting older as well. She's an older player, um, and the
Yeah. I think
lifespan. Sorry, could you shall I just
uh
finish off this week? The lifespan of,
yeah, yeah.
a football player is very short, and she was talking about
Mhm.
everything in her life as a football player has been managed. Well, I needed to get
Mhm.
up at a certain time. I need to wear certain things.
Yeah.
I need to do certain things. I need to be at training on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Then I need to make sure that I
Mhm.
have, do this, that, and the other in order to recover from a match. And everything has been plotted and planned in terms of what she does. And she said that
Yeah.
she felt as though she never even believed there was a life beyond football, but there is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting, Bev, the lifespan. Overall, yes, the careers of athletes are shorter in terms of a career in general, if you wanna compare it to other people, of course. But I think what's really interesting is as things have changed and we touched on, um, you know, how the game has changed, there's more fixtures, there's more demand on bodies. I think you're going to see a lot less players, having careers well into their 30s or into their 40s. So just on example, as an example, and I think Europeans are it's a little bit on the earlier end for them, but there's quite a few examples. I mean, the greatest player this country, my country's ever produced, Christine Sinclair, retired at the age of 41, but she also
Wow.
started her career in the late 90s at a time where that demand was not as large. I would be, you know, uh, you'd be kind of interested to see in 10 years' time if players are playing into their mid to late 30s or into their early 40s. Marta is still playing, but again, she's 40 years old, a different kind of generation of players because that demand has changed. Another one, Becky Sauerbrunn, a famous US defender, played until the age of 39, but they came from a different generation, right, of players. Now,
Um,
I struggle to see Aaliyah Williamson still playing at the age of 41, not because she can't, but because she probably will not be physically capable of doing it,
oh, yeah.
um, just because of past injury issues, the demand that's gonna be put on her body. Someone like her, for example, or any players of her kind of age category and younger, um, it's gonna be really, really interesting to see. There might be a few odd ones. I always joke Lucy Bronze probably gonna still be playing at the age of 50, but she's an outlier for sure.
Mm,
She's definitely an outlier, but I think that the lifespan of that career is shortening, and the European players tend to retire a little earlier to begin with. So it's gonna be really interesting to look at what those trends, what they show us in the next 5 to 10 years for sure.
absolutely. I quite agree with you because I can't.
Mhm,
Because it's so nuanced, I mean, just from our conversation today, it is just slow
mhm,
coming forward in the research, and this is why we've worried about the women's game, because the foundation are so wobbly. They really are,
mhm.
and the more
Yeah,
we've often talked about the amount of research that we are doing to put these podcasts together, and it's quite mind blowing. It sends you down a rabbit hole. It really
mhm.
does. 'Cause the picture
It does.
is yeah, the picture is very like it's like patchwork, isn't it? It just it is uneven
Yeah,
terrain, and you never will you will have a concentrated or a cluster, clubs, and yet further down in the
mhm,
grassroots, there is such a yawning gulf between them, isn't there? So but what
mhm.
happens between now and the future. There's a gap, there's a space. And like I said, the research
Absolutely.
and the money there is just not coming quick enough in order to resolve these issues, etc.
Mhm. Agreed, and as the game continues to grow for those top level leagues or clubs, the gap's just gonna become even larger, right? With
Um,
the, if that doesn't try to resolve itself because it's already quite stark and it's gonna be even larger, unfortunately, if we don't kinda get a hold on it and demand that there's better, resources and funding across the board because we don't wanna run into a situation where, a few countries in the world are running away with leagues or internationally, and everyone else is so far behind that there's no chance that they will ever get to a place where they can be properly resourced, properly funded, properly cared for in terms of health and wellness. Because the more demand that gets put on the top level, the more strain is going to be felt, unfortunately, on the bottom down. It is a pyramid, right?
yes.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
unfortunately.
It's by
Yeah,
osmosis, isn't it,
definitely.
really?
So, yeah, it really is. It really is. You asked me to pay attention to negatives, positive patterns, correlations. I tried my best. I definitely get a little distracted into our conversation, but I think the one biggest correlation is that there's so many correlations.
Yeah,
I don't even know how to
absolutely.
explain it. There's so many
Yeah,
factors that contribute
yeah.
to each other and patterns. And I think the biggest pattern that I noted down is there is a lot of patriarchal or sort of
Mm.
influence on health and wellness and what we understand or what we don't understand about injuries and about women's health in general, and that has greatly impeded our understanding moving forward.
Yes, I've got exactly the same as you, to be honest with you. Going back to the shaky
Mhm,
foundations, but then the shaky foundations can all be linked to patriarchy and misogynism and
mhm.
sexual discrimination and gender bias.
Yeah.
Doctors not really taking things seriously. We said that can be ubiquitous and goes beyond and it extends beyond the woman's game. Can I just mention one last
Mhm.
element of health, and that's pelvic floor
Sure.
health and bladder leaks? It was just a very
Mm.
interesting study. So it was
Yes.
talking about because it tenor has actually
Mhm,
it was more leaning towards rugby, but it's still
mhm,
across elite women elite athletes in general, if you like. It can still be applied. And Tennis teamed up with
mhm,
M. Clarkson and Molly Wright of the rugby world. And what they
mhm,
did, it was very, very powerful. They said 67% of women are embarrassed, 58% are self-conscious, and
Mhm.
36% felt a degree of shame. And what it did, in Cell FC, it had 10
Mhm.
shirts, and it put them on the line, yeah, of the,
Mhm.
what do you call it? Oh, the goalposts, the line of the goalposts. So they made a line out of it
Oh,
with 10,
yep.
yeah, with 10 shirts on
Yep.
there, but 7 of
Mhm.
them were blank because by the age of, 40, 7 out of 10 athletes will have, taken themselves out of the game because of pelvic floor health and bladder leaks.
Wow.
So,
Mm.
what what Tenor has done in teaming up with these high-profile rugby players is to put together a content, podcasts about education, in
Yeah.
tips, stories, sharing stories, anecdotal evidence, all those kind of things, in order to break down the taboo and that other women do experience these things. And yet, with the right kind of
Mhm.
support in tips and management, you can still continue to be an elite athlete. I just thought it was a very
Mhm.
interesting piece of research that I came across.
Yeah, that definitely came up, and, pelvic floor specialists are working in a lot of clubs now. And again, a long time ago, or not a long time ago, but more recently, it was thought that pelvic floor specialists are more for women who are post childbirth.
Yeah.
But that doesn't. I mean, that affects you, of course. It has an effect on your pelvic area, but it definitely is not just for people who've had children, physically had children. It's for players in general because there's so many things that, can kind of mess with your pelvic floor,
Well,
in terms of training. There's so many things, right? So that is a huge one, and that's a massive resource that a lot of clubs have tried to implement and do have the ability to have that, specialist or consultant or whatever it might be on staff, because they've realized, the benefit of having them there and that this is a kind of a major problem. It's not just a secondary or an
yeah,
isolated problem to people, again, who've maybe had babies and so forth.
yeah.
Definitely a big one, and I think this might be another one. I'm gonna earmark this conversation, Bev, as one that we might potentially wanna go deeper into. I would be curious to try to get someone, like a physio or someone who has a little bit
Oh,
more,
yes.
understanding or expertise specifically in sports injuries, because that would
Yeah,
be really great conversation to bring on the podcast for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, but
Can I
yeah, it's a
just to
great
round
chat.
off yeah, it is.
Yeah,
I could go on and on. It is a big one, isn't it, this one? In terms of the patterns and
definitely.
correlations, mention the negatives, but I'd
Mm,
also like to balance that out
yes,
with some positives in that we've got some big
yes.
companies now, such as Tenor,
Mhm,
that are supporting the
yep,
game. Sure, if you remember, I mentioned Sure and the movement,
mhm,
project that they were involved in. There are many journalists, investigative journalists that are interested in ACLs and are keeping, they're monitoring correlations
yes,
between ACL and what might have caused that. So, and in doing so,
mhm,
more and more high-profile players are talking about various mental and physical health issues, and that encourages fan
yep,
engagement, and they're interested. It goes beyond
yep,
football in that, maybe you don't have to be interested in women's football, but if you come across something like this, it
mhm,
might just spark you to do something if you've been worried and you're in isolation with an aspect of physical or mental health. And obviously, the purpose built
for sure.
academies and training centres. So, just to balance out the negatives with the positives, because we can
Mhm.
see things are going forward as the vision widens and becomes more crystallised.
Definitely. On that too, this year, Chelsea women had a sponsor by Flo, the period products, menstrual products,
Okay.
to
Yep.
try to normalize menstrual health and stuff. That was one of their sponsors, and they did quite a bit of promotion and content with them as well. So that was another aspect of it because there's a lot of shame and stigma around your menstrual cycle and just those sorts of things. It makes young girls feel a little bit better about their own bodies too when they see these women that they look up to normalizing this, like, hey, this is normal, all good, so that fan engagement is there as well, but also just kind of helps from that perspective of normalizing it because it is normal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely is. Yep.
Hmm. Hmm. Definitely. Yeah. As I said, great chat, Bev. I think we had a lot to speak about today. And again, something we're probably going to do a deeper dive into. So look out for a future episode on women's health and injuries in sports. One little thing we wanted to touch on. So starting for next week, actually, I just ran this by Bev right before we started recording. We're going to do a quick little segment again, starting next week's episode, and it's going to be a question or hot take segment. And how it's going to work is there will either be a question that Bev and I will both answer, or there'll be a hot take that we can one of us or both of us can provide, and it's not going to be up for debate. So if you want to explain your side of it, whether it's a take or whether you're answering a question, absolutely, but no explanation is needed either. It's just going to be a kind of, we're saying this is kind of how we feel on it, and let's move on. I think it's going to be really fun. Fun questions like underrated players, or do you like afternoon versus evening fixtures? Just fun stuff like that. A little thing to round off every episode. Look out for that starting next week.
Uh-huh. Shall I say what our topic is for
Hmm.
next week? Yep, because
Absolutely, go for it.
put your comments in so we can read some of that. We really, really welcome your comments because it's always about developing and building a community supporting the women's game. So next week, pop your thoughts down in the comments. It's the fans. So
Mhm.
we'll be looking into the
Yeah.
fans. A definition of
Yay.
fans, the demographic of fans,
Mhm,
what it actually manifests as in terms of attending, a match day. Lots of questions around it and
mhm.
lots of nuances, I'm sure.
Absolutely. It definitely will be, and as Bev said, please leave us all your thoughts, questions, comments, overall views on the podcast. We welcome them. Find us again on YouTube, and we will be back next week. Bev, thanks so much for spending an hour with me again today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Thank
See you, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.